Welcome everyone to my Death Stranding video. The whole thing has gone through like 5 script rewrites and 3 full reshoots because I just didn't feel like I was doing it justice. But at this point, I gotta do it. The sequel's out in a week by the time this releases, so no more time to waste. Right at the top, I think it's probably fair to get my biases out into the open. After all, Death Stranding is my favorite game of all time, and this video will largely be talking about all the things I think make it awesome and wonderful and brilliant, but that's not to say I don't have some criticisms of this game. In fact, I have more than a few, like the lackluster and basically entirely avoidable combat system, except for the bosses, or how holding the triggers completely trivializes the balancing mechanic, or the crazy jarring and immersion-breaking product placement, to name a few. No, truth be told, the Monster Energy is actually kind of cool. It's the advertisements for Norman Reedus's The Ride that are a little bit over the top. Which, for those of you who don't know, the fastest bike in the game is one that's themed after Norman Reedus's show The Ride, and every time you get on it, Norman Reedus's character, Sam, does a little mini advertisement. He goes, "Oh, this is just like Norman Reedus's The Ride." It's a lot. And truth be told, I do think it's important to criticize your favorite things. It helps you understand your preferences better, and it gives whoever the creator is a little bit of feedback, assuming it's constructive criticism, as to how to make their stuff better. Something I've noticed a lot in opinion pieces and video essays, especially on like short-form social media like Twitter or bluesky, is a lot of people don't really understand why they don't or don't like things, so I think it is important to take a critical look at things you do enjoy. However, this video essay will be mostly praises for this game, which is why I put a lot of the criticisms up top. Honestly, Death Stranding has been mired in both praise and criticism that don't really seem to come from any point of critical thought, and this has been happening since launch, hell, since before launch. On launch, the fanboys, girls, and NBs were more than happy to spout how it's the perfect game without recognizing its shortcomings, while on the flip side, haters had no problem going ham on any pre-release interview or media that painted the game as weird, or even my least favorite bit of criticism, just calling it a walking simulator. And on that point, video games take all kinds of different forms and genres. Even if Death Stranding's most apt descriptor was to be a walking simulator, there are a ton of really brilliant walking simulators out there in the gaming space. I mean, gameplay takes all kinds of different forms in video games. I mean, people play the meat and fuck games, and those basically boil down to click and hold in the right order and watch a movie, but that's the beauty of art. It takes all kinds of different forms. That last sentence was a bit of an ad-lib, and on listening back, I'm realizing that I kind of implied the meat and fuck games were art. And I want to go on the record saying I don't want to commit to that statement. I don't want to commit one way or the other. I don't really have many opinions on the meat and fuck games, so I don't want to put anything out there. So we've had folks from the extreme criticism and extreme praise side, both sides of the spectrum, kind of make this game difficult to talk about, especially immediately after release. However, over the years, this has calmed down quite a bit, and people seem much more willing to talk about this game and kind of have a conversation about both its good and its bad. However, I want to make the premise of this particular video super clear. It's not a review, it's not a lore dump, I won't even really be going over the story in its entirety. It's not a tips and tricks guide either, so if you're looking for any cool skips or anything like that, this is not the place. If you've watched my content or scoured my social medias, you'll probably have noticed that I don't really like talking about things that I don't like. I have a much harder time putting into words the reasons why I don't like something, and I think that kind of makes me not want to talk about not liking things in the first place. I feel like I'm coming at it with, not a full cup of knowledge. I don't know if that's a phrase. In any case, this video is a good example of that. I'm here to talk about the things Death Stranding does well, the unique things it does that nothing else does, and the things that make it my favorite game of all time. It's taken me essentially years and multiple playthroughs and a 100% completion to articulate this, so I do hope you enjoy. Death Stranding, while being a game that I love, is also a game that I really hesitate to recommend to anyone. It's a game I enjoy playing, however I can't deny that some people might bounce off the gameplay super hard. However, I am rather surprised that I enjoyed the gameplay as much as I do. I struggle a lot with open world games, they don't really engage me super hard. and something about the gameplay loop in Death Stranding just clicked for me in the best way possible. As you've probably heard, if you boil Death Stranding's gameplay down to its basest components, it is just a game about delivering packages. But I think boiling it down like that is kind of doing it a disservice. Death Stranding has a lot of really cool systems that all add on top of each other and work together to make the act of delivering packages incredibly engaging. Not to mention it has a really impressive environment that's fun to explore, and it's open-ended enough to let you find your own path using the various traversal supplies that you acquire throughout the game. Add on to that the network features that both help guide new players as to where some of the best areas or paths to travel are, and giving you a place to build on to players' existing structures leads to a pretty engaging intertwining of creative exploration that honestly makes the act of delivering packages incredibly fun and kind of like a little puzzle. While I do believe that these unique paths that each player will take are kind of where the game shines, I do have to credit Kojima and the rest of the crew at Kojima Productions for kind of pacing the early game really well and introducing you to the gameplay in little bite-sized chunks. The very first package you deliver, outside of the very opening sequence where you're just kind of collecting packages in the open world, is delivering a dead person to an incinerator. We'll get more into why you're doing this when we talk about the characters and themes, but this is one hell of an opening package for you to deliver. The humans are also one of the most difficult packages to deliver as far as how awkward they make the balancing system. Their weight just distributes very strangely, and you have to be pretty on point to not fall over while you're traversing the mountains. Now, this package isn't exactly balancing hard mode. You don't have a ton of extra tools that you have to take with you that lead to unbalanced shoulders or arms, or having to worry about weight distribution or anything. Bodies are just sitting center on your back. You do get to experience Sam kind of wobbling around as he tries to balance this body on his back as he moves around the rough terrain. This first mission also doesn't have any extreme weather conditions. There's no heavy wind or super sheer cliffs, and there's no rocks falling from mountains or anything, and it's pretty difficult to fail in any meaningful way, as usually the condition meter you have to worry about with packages isn't really such an issue when you're just carrying around a dead body. It's kind of hard to make them any worse, I guess. This mission also doesn't have you worrying about any traversal tools or anything like that. There are NPC ladders and ropes scattered about on your way up to the incinerator, but they're not really super necessary, so it's a pretty easy jaunt up to the incinerator from where you start. As far as first missions go, it's not particularly deep gameplay-wise, but it does really good job as a set piece for establishing not only the bleakness of the setting, but also the absolute core of the gameplay. You know, the walking simulator stuff everybody talks about. I don't know if I feel like I'm sounding extra salty against people that criticize it as a walking simulator. I think it's a dumb criticism, but I mean, they kind of have a point. You walk. Once this opening segment finishes out, however, is when the game truly starts to open up, although once again to a rather limited degree compared to the wild zipline tracks and fun vehicles you'll end up having by the end of the game. For the most part, I also consider this entire eastern area sort of a tutorial area. The game certainly gives the player much more freedom as far as how they choose to traverse and explore the environment, but the tools you're allowed to use are pretty primitive, though I do believe this is ideal pacing. The game gives you a fairly open area with a river and cool rock features to traverse around with your super basic tools of climbing ropes and ladders to help you with terrain you can't just walk over. I think this section sets the player up super well for both the challenges and the gameplay loop that they'll see for pretty much the entire rest of the game. Things will evolve, obviously, as the game progresses, the terrain gets harsher, the tools become more advanced, but this is the core gameplay at its simplest. The player will get acclimated to maintaining balance, traversing cliffs, not jumping over cliffs, refilling your stamina with your flask, and then refilling that at the river, and this section gives you all of those basics. However, even now the player can start to play with some of the more complex systems and decision making. Do you find yourself traveling through the same route multiple times to get from one base to another? One well-placed ladder will serve you better than always carrying a lot wherever you go. Traveled through one area kinda steep enough times? Well, I'll be damned. The terrain is flattened out a bit, and it makes your repeated trips much, much easier. The early locations that you deliver to in this eastern continent even triangulate in such a way that it's pretty simple for the player to find a good spot for a locker where they can place items for an emergency. That'll be useful no matter which of the delivery points you're heading to. And after a few deliveries, when you're just starting to get the lay of the land, the game finally hits you with your first real challenge. Deliver to the wind farm. This is maybe the first instance where your delivery stakes really ramp up, and it's a pretty notorious area even on multiple playthroughs. Hell, I think most Death Stranding players still remember their first trip to the wind farm. To elaborate a bit on why this particular spot is so difficult, let's start with the lay of the land. Believe it or not, the wind farm is really fucking windy. This means stacking your packages high instead of on your body can lead to Sam stumbling wildly when a large gust of wind blows through. Couple that with the sty? There's no sty in this game. I don't even think there's horses. Or pigs. Pigs go in a sty. Horses go in a jail cell. Couple that with the quite steep incline in the forested area with a lot of unstable ground, and this is where most players will make their first tumble, watching their packages fall meters and meters behind them that they'll have to trudge back down the hill and pick up only to brave the windy hill once more. As if the first real terrain challenge wasn't an issue, it's also, as far as I'm aware, one of the first highly rainy areas. While someone who's never played before can obviously see how rain making the terrain slick would pose a problem, there's also the other part of rain that occurs in Death Stranding that I think now would be a good time to get into. The rain in Death Stranding takes the form of something called timefall. The effects of timefall are actually shown in the very first cutscene that you see, and it causes anything that it touches to rapidly age and deteriorate. Narratively, the consequences of this are fairly obvious. It's one of the reasons why nearly everyone is so holed up in their bunkers or other shelters. It's also why Sam and the other porters have to wear those bulky suits. These suits are resistant to timefall and automatically detect timefall to throw up the hood to protect the porter. The timefall, however, also has a pretty dire gameplay effect as well, in the form of rapidly deteriorating your cargo. Most cargo has 2 health levels, the case or structure health level, as well as the actual cargo health. Various factors can affect this, like falling off ledges and having your cargo go tumbling or having timefall land on them. Timefall is nice in that it will deteriorate the case health before it deteriorates your actual cargo, but it does mean you can't really afford to take your time in areas where timefall is falling. But wait, there's even more. In areas where timefall is occurring, you will also run into the game's primary enemy, the BTs. BTs, or beached things, take the form of these ghostly black apparitions with a kind of cord on them. BTs are the souls of the dead that have failed to cross completely to the other side. They appear in the realm of the living and are tied to the afterlife by their umbilical cord. The BTs stuck in this world reach out to the living for any form of connection, which unfortunately when that happens causes a void out. A void out is actually that large explosion that happened in the opening action scene as well as when the title drop happens. So generally, yeah, you want to avoid the BTs. As it stands with the gameplay, they are basically the oh shit mode of the game. When you enter an area with a BT, your BB will activate your Odra deck in a kind of sensor mode. That was a lot of lingo that probably doesn't make sense to people who haven't played this game. A BB is your cute little bridge baby, which is a baby that is connected to the afterlife due to their brain-dead mother. And the Odra deck is the cute little robot arm that the BBs can interface with to communicate with you. While in the sensor mode, the Odra deck will blink towards the nearest BT and spin rapidly the closer they get, and if the BTs get too close, they'll notice you and start to chase you, summoning up tar to impede your movement in an attempt to get you. So all of this stuff that I just mentioned all gets thrown at you for the wind farm delivery, and it is a huge ramp up in difficulty compared to your previous deliveries. But I think it's brilliant timing for it. The game needed something to kind of up the stakes at this point and keep people interested and wanting to move forward, give them a kind of challenge to overcome, and it does this perfectly. Finally reaching the top of that godforsaken hill with your hopefully not too beaten up cargo is a great feeling, and it's what kept me hooked for this entire first area. And God am I glad I stayed with it, because the final section of this first eastern area is a goddamn masterpiece. When you finally progress through and get the chance to go to Port Knot City and travel to the central area, you end up faced with likely your longest traversal of the game so far, or at the very least your most difficult. The trek to Port Knot City is not an easy one. Despite your multitude of tools you've acquired in your time in the eastern area, including a fancy little bike, the incredibly rocky terrain is not easy to conquer. My first time through, I had not nearly enough supplies, woefully unprepared for just how treacherous this section would be, and ended up having to run back to stock up more. Beyond just the terrain, the area is littered with timefall and an absolutely bonkers amount of it. Stealthing through this rocky terrain is an endeavor, a test of patience of how well and quickly you can use your tools when things go south. Or, in the case that shit really hits the fan, how well you can utilize your newly developed anti-BT tools. It's an even greater challenge than the wind farm, but when you make it through, the game does something truly incredible. As you finally make it through the mountain pass and find yourself out of the timefall, you're met with nothing but beautiful green landscapes, a serene body of water, and your safe haven Port Knot City resting quietly in the distance. You've overcome your hardest challenge yet, the finale of the eastern area, and the game gives you time to bask in that. You get to make your way to Port Knot City, no enemies, the terrain is nice and easy to stroll through, and all the while the game audio fades away to create one of the most beautiful moments I've ever experienced in a video game. This moment I think about every single time I replay this game. It's so cool. After easily the hardest part of the first 5 hours of this game. Every time I'm excited to play through the eastern area once more, despite it just being a tutorial that I know how to do incredibly easily at this point, just so I can get to this moment once again. It's these moments that make me want to tell everyone to play this game just to experience this. It's unlike anything else. Sure, a tough boss fight that ends in a jaunty tune on victory is great, and defeating a evil to cleanse a whole city back to its pristine shine is wonderful, but here you didn't really do anything quite that grand. You climbed some rocks, avoided some ghosts, and delivered some packages. And still the game lets you know just how important, how significant what you just did was by giving you a beautiful vista, an amazing soundtrack, and most of all, a little bit of reprieve. I did not expect to like Death Stranding. I thought it would be boring, I thought it would be lame, and I largely played it just to see what Kojima and his crew were able to whip up on their own. I stuck around for the cool opening cutscenes and the incinerator trek, but I still wasn't really sold. I did continue to stick around even to the wind farm, and that got my gamer blood riling for an actual challenge that I thought was engaging enough to see what was next. And then the trek to Port Knot City sold me. I realized I was actually having fun. I was invested in this world, in the gameplay, in the act of just delivering packages. I don't know what kind of magic the folks at Koji Pro pulled to get me invested like this without even realizing it, but it's really something special. Apologies for going on and on so much about literally the first tutorial area, but like I mentioned, it sets the tone and core of the game so well. From here on out, things get different. The pacing isn't quite as tight as the eastern area with just how open the central area is, but the highs are really fucking high. From this point on, the game opens up immensely. The central area is jam-packed with new delivery routes that will have you scaling super sheer cliffs, making your way through rocky terrain, traversing huge mountaintops, and even building things like roads to simplify your trip. This is where player freedom becomes a huge priority, as you can tackle these challenges pretty much any way you want. My personal preference was building as many roads as possible. I wanted to deliver cargo using cars or get places as fast as possible using motorcycles. Gathering the supplies for the road also had me interacting with a lot of really cool side objectives, like gathering resources from dropped packages or from mule encampments, which are kind of like random enemies that are scattered throughout the world that try to steal your packages. This central area will also see you unlocking pretty much every traversal tool by the end of it, and setting up your perfect routes, especially with zip lines, was a ton of fun. As I mentioned earlier, I kind of bounce off open world games pretty hard. This is largely due to the fact that I find them kind of daunting. There's too many objectives and too many things to do, and priorities as far as what you should be doing are always really weird, especially when doing stuff like the main quest ends up locking you out of stuff. For some reason with Death Stranding, though, I didn't find this open world daunting, and I think that's largely due to its incredibly weird online features. This game does not feature traditional online stuff where you'll interact directly with other players, but instead uses some sort of super secret Kojima Productions networking magic to have some player structures appear in your world. This actually works great in two ways. First of all, having player structures in your world is just a huge benefit most of the time, and you'll often find a battery station right where you need it or a convenient ladder or rope ready to save you time. However, it also helps guide you in where to traverse and where to place your own tools, especially since you want to make them effective for those sweet, sweet anonymous internet likes randoms can give you if they see your structure in the wild. The climax of this online features thing for me was up in the mountains area. With the help of a few random people's zip lines, I was able to make a huge zipline structure that spanned every single mountaintop delivery point, making both actually traversing this hellscape fun and easy, but also made 100%ing this area a breeze. The collaboration aspect of this game ended up being a huge plus for me, and I was almost always thankful to see random structures out and about I could use or build from. I definitely found it as more of a gimmick at first, but these random acts of kindness appearing in the game turned out to be great for gameplay, and it also fit into this theming super well. Throughout the game, Sam is alone. You are the only one making these deliveries, but through the collaboration system, you realize you aren't the only one facing those same challenges, and can learn from or use the things that helped people before you, and maybe leave some things behind for people who have to make your journey later. Now, the inner workings of this system are completely unknown to me. I do want to thank the people who finished off the last two pieces of road after me, after I put in hours and as many resources as I could possibly gather to get as much of the roads in the central area done as possible. It was honestly a great treat logging on and seeing my hard work built upon. I could honestly spend hours talking about all of the key set pieces within the central area like I did for the first area, but I highly recommend just experiencing them for yourself. It's basically a huge sandbox with a billion ways to conquer, and it makes for an incredibly fun gameplay loop, which I hope by now I've managed to describe pretty well. There is, however, one moment in this game that kind of flips this all on its head, and it's in the best way possible. Towards the end of the game, you are tasked with traversing from the very edge of the map all the way back to the beginning, but this time you're cut off from your chiral network. You can't build, you can't make tools, and vehicle storage is useless, as you now just have to make the journey back on foot. It's honestly an incredible part of the game, showing how much the things you've made have connected and made the world easier to maneuver around. You have to go back, but you get all of the advantages, everything you built on the way there. It's not gone. It's there to help you on your journey home. You get to very straightforwardly see how much of an impact you made on the world as soon as it helps you. It's fucking incredible. Being cut off from it makes you feel alone again, and every cliff and terrain and God forbid BT area becomes a challenge once again. But the thing is, you're not alone. The one thing you do have during this section is other people's structures. The life-saving rope up a cliff or motorcycle stranded away in some rocks becomes like an oasis in a desert. This section really sells the network features and once again hits the theming of how only together can the world truly be connected. The game is honestly full of hard-hitting moments like this, but I think what people come to expect from these games, Kojima games, is kind of the wacky stuff. You know, the Psycho Mantis, turn off the console, ride and stuff, and unfortunately there's not really a ton of that in this game. It keeps its narrative and thematic presence throughout the whole game rather well, and aside from the network features as a whole, there really isn't any major meta stuff. It is, however, full of cool creative gameplay moments, which I think is also something Kojima has done really well in his previous games, and I really want to highlight one in particular. Throughout the whole game, we're given clues about the tar that appears when BTs chase you. In the boss fights, it summons structures and terrain, and in the big boss fights with Mad's character, which I'm kind of sad I won't get a chance to talk about, however, it even summons whole time periods from the past. These kind of vague hints that you don't realize are hints are actually all for one specific section as you make your way to the end of the central area and find yourself standing in front of a huge tar lake, and there's no way to cross it at all. All you find there is a document stating, which in truth is a very helpful hint, that mentions that the tar summons things from the past. To proceed, you kind of have to go against everything the game has taught you up to this point and actually wade into the tar. This summons up, well, structures from the past that actually let you progress. It's a super unique puzzle, and its solution is present from incredibly early on in the game, though not in any immediate way, and it helps that the kind of action set piece you get during this is also really, really cool. So yeah, I guess at the end of the day, Death Stranding is just a walking simulator, a package delivery game. But just beneath the surface, it's so much more than that. It's a puzzle game where finding and creating efficient routes is the solution. It's a co-op game where you're building with other people to create an easier world to move around in. It's so much deeper than just a walking simulator, and I love it for that. But where this game shines even more is everything surrounding the gameplay. And there's nothing that shines quite as bright as the cast of characters. As we've come to expect with Kojima's other endeavors with Metal Gear Solid, this game also has an incredibly tight cast of main characters that really bring home the narrative, complete with names like Deadman, Hartman, and the man who needs no introduction, Hartman, whose real name in the game is John McClane, just in case you didn't quite get it. Kojima even took this opportunity to mocap all his friends and use their bodies in the game, so you'll see folks like Guillermo del Toro, Conan O'Brien, Junji Ito, and even more. But ridiculous names aside, having names like this are vaguely narratively accepted. In a world where actual communication is incredibly limited, referring to someone by their personality or a major character trait helps identify who these folks are. For example, you know exactly who Hartman is. The guy with a heart condition who dies every 24 minutes, especially if you're tasked with finding him across the country as opposed to if his name was like Derek or something. I'll admit this is kind of a reach to justify the wacky names, but it does fit thematically. There are a lot of characters in this game that all get their own fleshed out story, and in all honesty, I don't think I could do them justice if I tried to write about each and every one. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on 3 of my favorites that I think exemplify Death Stranding at its core. First off, I want to start off with Mama, a character who you need near the end of the first half of the central area portion of the game. Now, bear with me here, as this is a little out of left field, but Mama is a mother. I know, shocker. But it's a bit more complicated than that, and we'll have to take a look at her twin sister, Lochna. So Mama and Lochna actually built the chiral network together and are a huge part of Bridges, and Sam has to go see Mama in the first place in order to repair his Cupid, which is the cool necklace of USBs with Maxwell's equations on them that link bunkers to the chiral network. Fitting in with the game's themes of two halves and bridging connections, the two sisters also have opposite problems with their reproductive organs. Mama has issues with her eggs, and Lochna has issues with her uterus. Before the start of the game, the two agreed to have a child by using Lochna's eggs and Mama's uterus. However, when the baby was being born, the hospital Mama was in was attacked by terrorists, and she and the baby were killed. Sort of. Mama says that she gave birth on the other side, which caused her to remain in the land of the living, with her child becoming a harmless BT that was attached to her. She was, however, dead. She has no vitals and is only in this world due to her connection with her child. although due to that connection, she is forced to stay in the ruins of the hospital where she died. This is, I believe, the first instance of a harmless BT in the game. Mama interacts with the BT baby the way a mother would, and it has never gone seeking another body to threaten a void out. Mama's story is already fairly tragic, but it does unfortunately get worse. After her death, she cut ties with her sister altogether due to guilt mirroring the kind of isolationism we see throughout the entire game. As such, Sam has to travel back and forth from Mama to Lochna until the chiral network reaches a breaking point, where Mama does have to travel to Mountain Knot City in order to work with her sister to repair the chiral network. This involves Mama cutting ties with her BT baby, the baby that essentially saved her when she died. Sam cuts the ties, letting the baby travel back to the beach and also essentially killing Mama, as the baby was the only thing keeping her in the living world. Sam then treks up the mountain with Mama on his back in order for her to reunite with her sister and save the chiral network. This story is honestly a great microcosm of the themes of the game as a whole, with Mama needing the courage to abandon her comfort and her life and her unborn BT child in order to connect once again with her sister when they had abandoned each other. It is not an easy sacrifice to watch, let alone participate in as Sam, and it is easily one of the most heart-wrenching stories in the game. But once you reach Mountain Knot City, Mama does finally get to speak to and make up with her sister, and something very strange happens. When Mama does unfortunately die, Lochna's eye turns blue, signaling some part of Mama, or rather her real name Malingin, was returned to Lochna, and the twins, who together were often regarded as the same person in two bodies, who happened to share opposite reproductive failings that could only be overcome together, were finally brought together within the same body. This whole plot of Mama also showcases some of the more mysterious elements within the story that we don't necessarily have clear-cut answers for. The game makes many references to the soul and the body, often referred to in the game as Ha and Ka, and relates them often to the BTs, but to see the lines of the living and the dead blurred so much within Mama's story make the world incredibly compelling, especially in regards to world building for a possible sequel. Or confirmed sequel. But Mountain Knot City is also home to my favorite character in this entire game, mocapped by hit director of Drive and Only God Forgives, Nicholas Windig Refn, or Hartman. Hartman is, in my opinion, one of the greatest characters in this game. He's introduced fairly early in the game, though only under the guise of Bridges' leading researcher on the beach. The beach, for a quick and dirty explanation that isn't thorough at all, is a kind of manifestation of a world between life and death. A place you do visit occasionally as Sam due to him being a repatriate, which is someone who can come back from death through the beach. It is unfortunately not at all a concept I can dive into thoroughly in this video, largely due to the fact that I don't think I could accurately describe the beach and what it represents completely succinctly or accurately. And honestly, that is something that occurs quite frequently within this game and its various different plot devices and themes, and it's kind of why I can't call this a lore or explanation video. Hartman's story, as you can expect, heavily hinges around this concept of the beach, and in an incredibly interesting way. Hartman himself is a sufferer of dooms, and dooms is actually a concept we should dedicate at least a little bit of time to explaining. Without spoiling too much, dooms is a condition that came about due to the Death Stranding and manifests itself in some people who are considered sufferers of dooms. Dooms itself exhibits a variety of different phenomena in the people who suffer it, but one of the most basic things is a chiral allergy, which causes the sufferers to cry when in the presence of things from the other side, like BTs, or in areas high in chiralium, which is the gold material that manifests around the world, often in the shape of hands. Also, if you're a chemistry person, the concept of chiralium is probably somewhat familiar to you, and it utilizes it in a really cool way in this game. I just don't have time to talk about it, but if you're a chemistry person, it's pretty cool. There are more extreme effects of dooms, however, that can cause people to manipulate or interact with things from the other side or the beach itself. For example, Fragile, who can effectively teleport by traveling through her own beach. These abilities are often referred to as various Dooms levels, with a higher Dooms level equating to more power or control over the other side, though exact Dooms levels of many of the sufferers are not explicitly given, and we can only kind of infer them from some of the collectible data logs, or by referencing them to like the one Dooms level we do know, Dooms level 2, which is what Sam has, that lets him kind of sense or detect BTs but not actually see them. For example, Fragile's abilities put her above level 2, but we don't know the exact level. Now, going back to Hartman, before the start of the game, but sometime after the Death Stranding, he was undergoing heart surgery. At the same time, his wife and daughter were caught in simultaneous voidouts, which, while it didn't affect the hospital Hartman was staying at directly, it did knock out the power to his life support, effectively killing him. Hartman saw his family on the beach before being ripped back to the world of the living when the backup generators kicked on and returned power to his life support. Hartman's entire life after this point became researching the beach in an attempt to find his family once more. However, and whether this is due to him being a doom sufferer or not, he does this in a much more hands-on way than you'd probably expect. Hartman decided he would relive that experience over and over again to research the beach himself, though in reality, he's looking for his family. Due to his heart condition, his heart stops every 21 minutes, and he has strapped a defibrillator onto his chest to resuscitate him every 3 minutes after he dies, giving him those 3 minutes to explore the beach. This is metal as hell, being a 24-minute cycle of life and death, and in case it isn't occurring to you just how wild that concept is, that means Hartman dies about 60 times a day, and he mentions that he has visited the beach 218,550 times, meaning that he has been doing this for nearly 10 years by the time he first meets Sam. And oh god, the first time you meet him is probably one of my favorite scenes in all of Death Stranding. When you first roll up to his lab, he has just returned from a cycle, or more specifically, he lets you in just before he comes back. The cutscene, which is slightly interactive, is a heavy one. You're about 2/3 of the way through the game at this point, and Hartman has a lot to explain. But during this, there's a timer going on through the whole scene. Eventually, you even get cut off as Hartman's heart stops. You realize that his entire lab has been crafted to support Hartman's cycle. The walls and floors are all padded in case it happens at an inopportune time. There's an AI to handle tasks during the 3 minutes he's dead, and he is never without his AED strapped to his chest. After the 3 minutes, you continue your conversation with Hartman, but as far as character introductions go, it's kind of hard to beat how direct and immersive Hartman's is. And if you haven't figured it out yet, that's why his name is Hartman. It's his whole thing. Beyond that, however, his family that died in the 2 voidouts, those also made a heart shape in the lake behind his lab, just to add to the whole thing. Hartman is a wonderfully written character. He, as with a lot of the Bridges members, is harboring a lot of knowledge about his specific area of expertise, and he is incredibly grateful to Sam that he has finally connected him up to share it with the rest of the chiral network. But beyond that, his feeling of loss and being unable to move on is so readily apparent immediately from the get-go. It's not just a character trait that comes up in dialogue occasionally. No, it's very clear that this obsession for his family has consumed his entire life to the point he has reshaped everything around him to support the frankly ludicrous idea that he should die every 24 minutes. And it's all kind of under the guise that he's doing it for research, which he is, but it's clearly the loss he feels for his family and that chance to find them again that is truly driving him. Hartman's story largely revolves around finally coming to terms with the fact that his family is dead, and that after hundreds of thousands of trips to the beach, he needs to accept that there are still people in the land of the living he's connected to that he also cares for. It's heartbreaking and heartwarming and inspiring by the time his story is finally resolved, and it leaves me incredibly excited for his role in the sequel, especially since his suit in the trailer gives confirmation of his Dooms level, which is a Dooms level 9, which is an absolute bonkers level of Dooms that has only ever been approached by the next character I want to talk about, Higgs. Motherfucking Higgs. Pretty boy, beautiful eyeliner, physics equations on his forehead, motherfucking Higgs. I absolutely adore Higgs as far as Kojima villains go. He's up there with like Vamp in Theatrics and Liquid in Strange Dialogue and Skullface in Atrocities. He's an evil and fucked up little guy, and in Kojima fashion, you even get a vaguely homoerotic fistfight with him. Where to start with Higgs, however, is kind of a difficult thing to figure out, and I think it's best we kind of start off in broad strokes. First off, his symbolism is some of the most on the nose in the game, at least at face value. His name is Higgs, after all, which is named after the Higgs boson, which has been referred to as the particle of God or God particle. I wouldn't be surprised if Higgs also considers himself a kind of god or god particle. He's cocky and humorous, constantly taunting Sam and his allies. He isn't afraid to use underhanded tactics to get his way, and he also isn't afraid to order pizza from Sam, albeit under an alias. His ego is off the charts, but for a really good reason. He's the strongest Dooms user we see in the game, strong enough to even conjure monstrous BTs to fight Sam. Story-wise, unsurprisingly, Higgs has a lot going on, and a huge portion of his backstory was revealed in the extra missions in the director's cut of the game, but to keep that short, he wasn't always terribly evil. He was at first a porter with a very low Dooms level, on the same level as Sam's. He eventually learned the secret of bridges, one I also wanted to hide until now to help you understand Higgs' motivations, that bridges BBs are unborn children. Or more specifically, they're 7-month-old fetuses taken from brain-dead mothers, which was the exact situation that caused the first void out. Bridges conducted BB experiments as a way to recreate these conditions to exploit BBs as a connection to the world of the dead, which is why they function as they do in the game. The umbilical cord represents that connection. These experiments were not always done under the most moral standards, which unfortunately, we're not going to talk about it, but Mads Mikkelsen's character's role covers that entire aspect. And I'd love to talk about it, but you should play the game. Mads Mikkelsen's awesome. So Higgs joined up with a terrorist organization to stop bridges, but that organization was eventually brought down by the United Cities of America. Eventually, Higgs met up with Amelie during his travels, who is the embodiment of the Extinction event, which, fuck, that sounds wild out of context, but there's a lot going on in this game and you should definitely play it. So Amelie gave him incredible powers and a fake BB to bring about the last Stranding, which is a kind of final extinction event. She wanted to bring that about as quickly as possible, which is where Higgs lands in our current game as the antagonist trying to bring about this last Stranding. So Higgs is a bad guy, you get it, but what makes him such a good character? Well, I think for that we'll have to look at some of the specific scenes that Higgs appears in or that happen as a result of Higgs. The first time we technically see him, though only for a moment, is in the second large cutscene of the game, the one that was a whole trailer that made everybody scratch their heads in confusion at what the fuck was actually going on. However, this scene is probably one of the most devastating things we actually see in the game. It's a void out of such large proportions that it effectively erases Central Knot City, which at the time was Bridge's capital and one of their largest major hubs. The significance of this is lost on both Sam and the player for a good few hours of the game until you finally do make it back to where Central Knot would be and see just how obliterated it became. But Higgs's deplorable acts don't end there. In the actual opening cutscene of the game, we see and are told that Fragile has been affected by timefall from neck to toe, and it turns out the reason for this was actually Higgs. He had rigged up packages with bombs and forced Fragile to run naked through timefall to dispose of them or let the city be destroyed by them. It's an incredibly horrifying cutscene, in all honesty. Bombs are a bit of a calling card with Higgs even giving Sam a fake package, which is actually a nuke, and Sam has to discover this and dispose of it in a giant lake of tar on the other side of the map before it actually explodes. This is one of my favorite missions in the game due to just how weird it is and how many ways it can play out. Some guy in a Bridges uniform just hands you a package and says, hey, you've got to deliver this. It's one of the few times you actually get a package handed to you like this and not from the conveyor belt, and that should honestly set off alarm bells right then and there. It reminds me a ton of the part in Metal Gear Solid 1 where after the torture scene where you can just find a bomb in your inventory that Ocelot planted there. It's essentially the same thing. The scanners you walk through at the distribution centers even call it out as being a weird package, but given that those are kind of just background visual effects you never really take note of and you walk through hundreds of times, you probably don't even notice that. You can also inspect it in your menu to see exactly what it is. But my first time I didn't recognize any of that. I went on my merry way and even went to go fight some mules along the way. I took a dive and everything promptly exploded. I had no idea what just happened, and it was perfect. And now for Higgs' worst sin of them all. He orders pizzas from you and he wants them hot. Under the alias Peter Englert, he orders these pizzas, which you have to travel with flat like a real pizza and deliver on time to keep them hot. They're unironically kind of hard missions in this game. Do enough of these and you get your connection rating all the way up with Peter Englert, and if you have your final confrontation with Higgs, you'll be led into the bunker, which rarely if ever happens, and you'll find it's actually Higgs' hideout, and you'll get a ton of cool lore. Now, I don't know if what I'm about to present here is actually canon or not, but my theory is due to how these pizza missions are kind of laid out, they're actually a way for Higgs to ensure Sam is away from the distribution centers before one of his dastardly plans. The first pizza delivery mission, while I do believe it's optional, does become available shortly before the mission where Higgs gives you the fake package bomb, and I like to think your strict pizza delivery timing mission was a way for him to prepare and ensure he could catch you on your way back. So yeah, Higgs is cool and wild and pretty and evil, basically perfect, but more importantly, he represents one of the game's major themes in an excellent way. And for as much as I'd like to dote on these characters forever, I do believe it's time for us to get to the meat of Death Stranding, the themes and ideas that it presents. Higgs, as you may expect since he's the antagonist, also represents the opposite of Sam thematically in this concept of stick versus strand. Now, we do kind of have to address the incredibly negative pre-release reception this concept got due to one of Kojima's interviews. When the game was first shown off around 2016's E3, which, wow, I kind of miss E3, that's wild, Kojima coined Death Stranding as the first Strand-type game. As with lots of shit Kojima says, we all collectively went, what the fuck does that mean? Eventually, as the game inched closer to release, more interviews began to shed light on what that does actually mean. A Strand-type game is a game that centers more around the connections a player can make, which I still kind of think doesn't make sense unless we look at its opposite, a stick-type game. Kojima in many interviews referenced Kobo Abe's short novel The Rope, and an excerpt from this short novel even appears at the very beginning of the game. The excerpt in particular frames two tools, the stick and the rope, or strand, as opposites, the rope to bring good things closer and the stick to keep evil at bay. This stick, in regards to Death Stranding's theming and pre-release interviews, represented how Kojima saw the gaming landscape at the time. Many games about defeating enemies, killing, shooting, and very little about embracing the good things, which is what Kojima wanted to accomplish with Death Stranding, a game about bringing good things together. This is where Kojima got more than a lot of flack for largely two reasons. One, I think, was calling Death Stranding the first Strand-type game, and I think even now I have trouble agreeing with that, at least with how Kojima has framed the idea in the early interviews. The idea that Death Stranding is the first game with a focus on connections and less about defeating or keeping evil away is a little preposterous. Secondly, the other thing he got flack for was the idea that a stick game was inherently not as good. I would love to give some benefit of the doubt here, however, that between the time crunch for both E3 and Game Awards stage spots and short interview questions, as well as possible translation issues, which I think it's worth noting, a fair few interviews were in neither Japanese or English-speaking publications, which means to make it back to us in the English-speaking world, it went through multiple translations. And between all of that, we probably lost a fair bit of nuance of what Kojima was actually trying to say here. I do think the bad press here made a lot of people scoff at the idea, however I do believe this idea of stick versus strand manifests itself incredibly well and incredibly naturally into Death Stranding. The strand part itself is immediately obvious. You play as the character who is championing this idea of strands, roaming around the decimated landscape of America to rebuild and reconnect people from their isolated bunkers. Your primary weapon even is just a strand of rope. The combat, while existent, is not your primary way of interfacing with the world, and many of your best tools for combat, like the rope or the bola gun, are completely non-lethal. Sam even gets to have some thematic tension when it comes to the BTs, where your best option is to literally cut their connection, sever them as a way to unstrand them from being stuck in the world of the living. It's an interesting contrast how the idea of strand gets spun with these tools of explicit severing, but still fits the idea the game is going for. Higgs, on the other hand, is the epitome of stick. He is your foil throughout the entire game. His methods are violent and his tools are lethal. Throughout much of the game, you're playing on the back foot against Higgs' tools, which is, I think, where this idea and Kojima's vision really shine. The strand is inherently not immediately as powerful as the stick. You have to methodically avoid BTs where Higgs can control them and summon powerful BT monsters. You have to spend long treks up dangerous terrain in order to continue your journey towards connection, where all Higgs needs is a bomb and to teleport. Your disadvantage against Higgs, however, always leaves the player feeling like they overcame a pretty daunting challenge during any one of his fights, or even more so against the Mads Mikkelsen boss fights where you get thrown into literal war zones. Though, for gameplay purposes, you do get access to some pretty nice weapons and grenades in those sections, which is cool that Kojima wasn't afraid to bend the idea a little to make sure the player is still having fun. Where Stick vs. Strand really shines and is given full attention with no bending of the rules, however, is in your final fight versus Higgs. In case the idea has been lost on you up to this point, this section makes it incredibly clear that Strand is at a complete disadvantage. Higgs has all his guns and grenades and powers, and you get your rope and your packages, no traditional weapons at all. But after hours of playing at this disadvantage, you know there's some ways to make the strand just as strong, and that bending the rules is necessary sometimes. And in this case, it's literally just hucking boxes at Higgs. Hey, non-lethal or not, this shit is gonna hurt, and it's fucking hilarious. I think it's rare to see such specific narrative theming integrate itself so well directly into a boss fight. It honestly astounded me the first time. Getting dropped into that fight with literally nothing, I ran around trying to figure out how this boss fight actually worked and wondering if I was missing something. How am I supposed to win this were my exact thoughts, and in the moment I thought it was just incredibly unfair. But once it clicked, my only thought was that Kojima Productions is full of geniuses. Is it silly? Totally. The fight even ends with one of Kojima's classic homoerotic fistfights. But the fact of the matter is it's an absolutely brilliant culmination of a theme that was prevalent throughout the entire game, and a way to show off that sometimes Strand can fight back against the stick. I really wish Stick vs. Strand didn't get so clowned on pre-release. I think it made a lot of people really dismiss the idea outright when playing, and miss how it plays into the primary theming of what the Strand does. That being the idea of connection, which is essentially the entire goal, premise, and motivation of this game. Since connection is so much of the game and its ideas are incredibly apparent just by playing the game, I do want to laser focus on one specific, albeit major way it manifests itself in our main character, Sam. Sam has a condition in this game called phobia, which is, in its simplest terms, a fear of being touched. And this meant a lot to me, because I also suffer from this condition, although I hadn't actually heard it called phobia before, but rather haphophobia, which is what my psychiatrist refers to it as. This condition can manifest in a variety of different ways, but it is generally a mild, uncomfortable burning sensation upon some human contact. It's not an easy thing to describe or explain, especially to people. Goodbye hugs at gatherings become stressful events I have to mentally prepare for, and needing to explain to a partner or loved one why you flinch at their contact even when you don't want to is not fun. Seeing an actual well-written character with this condition was kind of astounding. This kind of representation was a little wild, especially since Sam's condition is both apparent, addressed, treated with care, and presented as an emotional mirror to the connection theming that you play through. In Sam's case, his phobia also manifests physically, creating a kind of rash where he is touched. There is some information floating around that his condition also causes the handprints on him, but after playing through the game a few times and reading all the logs after 100%ing, unless I completely missed it, those are just from when he repatriates. Almost immediately, Sam's condition is noted by Deadman when Sam doesn't shake his hand, an occurrence that comes up more than a few times in the opening sequences of the game. I think Sam's condition also makes the idea that this whole journey was kind of pushed on him even more grating. Sam didn't want to do this job at all, the idea of reconnecting the chiral network, and everyone just tells him he's the only one who can and that he has to. It creates this really neat ironic framing where the only person who can connect the world is also unable to create emotional or physical bonds himself. Over his journey, Sam eventually does begin to overcome these barriers. No longer a lone porter traveling around, he has colleagues, even friends. He gets closer with Fragile, Deadman, all of the folks at Bridges, hell, even BB. The bunkers you deliver to even get a connection rating as well, which results in friendlier dialogue, gifts from the NPCs, or even new narrative moments. All of the actual gameplay you do represents Sam deepening both the connection of the chiral network and the emotional bond Sam holds as well. This idea of the bonds Sam has made and the progress he's made with forming them ends up being one of the crucial moments during the finale sequence of the game. Stranded on the beach after confronting Amelie, Sam is just stuck there waiting until he begins to hear his friends' voices. Hartman, Deadman, Fragile, they were all working together in order to find Sam on the beach and bring him back, and the only way they can do that is physically. Sam, having shown how much progress he's made with forming connections with others, grabs hold of their hands and is brought back. It's an incredibly touching moment, especially in contrast to the very beginning of the game where Sam couldn't even shake Deadman's hand. And my favorite part is Sam's emotional journey here is a deeply personal version of what Sam was accomplishing across the entire United States. And to make things even better, at the very, very finale of the game, when Sam is forced to bring BB to the incinerator, he breaks her free of her BB pod and embraces her fully. It's an incredibly touching moment on its own, and the idea of having essentially a parallel version of your main story quest manifest itself in the main characters on an emotional level, and represent the challenges just Sam has to tackle himself is amazing. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just Sam that overcame either the connection of the chiral network or his emotional barriers. It was his friends all working together, which I think is what the theme of connection is trying to represent. We don't have to go it alone. Sure, it might be hard, especially in the beginning when things are scary and unknown and uncertain. But no matter what the challenge is, whether it's learning to make meaningful emotional and physical connections with people or connecting the entire continental United States to a magic network that harnesses the power of a supernatural space between life and death, it can be overcome together. And, well, that's why I love Death Stranding. Sure, it's clunky and you can make the cars fly and the combat leaves a little to be desired, and the gameplay is absolutely not going to click with everyone. But it's also new and fresh, has an incredibly well-written cast of characters, has meaningful challenges to overcome, and even has you defeat the big bad by throwing boxes at him. It's full of charm, earnestness, and uniqueness that was very welcome and is hard to find outside of indie games. I know with a lot of people it resonated hard with it releasing just a few months before the COVID lockdowns, and I would have loved to talk about that, but since I played and finished it before 2020 even rolled around, I think I'll leave that to people who have actually experienced it firsthand during that time. What I'm most excited for is, I think, between the characters, the world, and the story, it has laid incredible groundwork for a new IP, and I cannot wait to see what the sequel holds. I'll be streaming that a ton on my Twitch once that releases, and I hope to see you there. Oh, you thought there wasn't going to be a plug right at the end? I gotcha. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Rose_Waltz. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you all so much for watching.